hard. It's a hard act to follow. Mostly because I can't stop laughing. Madam Speaker, I am rising to speak to Bill 56, an act to end oil and natural gas exploration and drilling. And it does concern me that members are not on board, though I'm not shocked. There have been some quite odd things said so far. I'm going to address some of them, and I'm also just going to speak to why this is important and how this fits into what needs to be done to address the climate crisis. And so, one of the reasons this needs to be done, and I'm not sure why the member from Tracadie-Shiloh doesn't think legislation is important, but legislating things is important. And so we need to put into legislation what we want to happen, what we don't want to happen. And I think we should listen to the experts and the scientists and the International Energy Agency, and they say, don't develop any new fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is listen to the experts, think long-term, and prevent any new fossil fuel infrastructure from being developed here. And so it's quite straightforward. We have another bill coming on renewable energy, so members will be excited about that. And I even passed a motion in the Environmental Stewardship and Climate Change Committee for us to hold hearings that I expect will happen in September on decarbonization strategy. And so I'm really looking forward to that as well. But this is one important piece of the puzzle, Madam Speaker. And how we got here to a point where we are in a climate crisis, it's quite frustrating, because before I was even born, there were people that knew what was happening, that the carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide and others like methane, which is significant when there's fracking, they knew, and the oil and gas companies knew, and they actively hid that information and funded disinformation campaigns to confuse the public and maybe that's why some people here are a bit confused. But there was an active campaign, and frankly, it's still going. This idea that we have to continue the addiction to fossil fuels. What we need to do is skip over fracking, skip over any new fossil fuel infrastructure in this transition, this just transition that we need to have, that needs to do what we need for our communities, Madam Speaker, which is to stop relying on fossil fuels, to not have any new fossil fuel infrastructure, but that's a piece of it. We also need to ramp up energy efficiency. And there's many ways to do this. One of the most important would be to see a really big increase in funding to actually make sure there's energy efficiency renovations in more households in this province. That's what I would love to see. And I've been pushing for it, and I think the minister has been pushing for that and would like to see more funding for that. So let's see that from this government, because that would reduce our requirements for energy, Madam Speaker. That is essential. We do need more renewable energy, and we need to envision a different type of future. And I know that can be hard for some people, but it can't be that all of our energy is coming from just a few big sources. We need to decentralize our energy. We need to have solar and wind, and we need to have battery storage. We need to have grid tie-ins. We need to rethink what we've been doing, because what we've been doing has brought us to a point of disaster where people literally die because of climate catastrophes. We've seen people in our province be severely impacted, whether it's from huge storms. I think of Dorian, I think of Fiona, that I know my riding has been severely impacted. People's properties have been damaged. People in Bay Vert, which was, I think, the hardest hit in terms of loss of power, it was like way past the 72-hour point of, they tell us to be prepared for 72 hours. That won't cut it with the type of climate catastrophes we're seeing. Hundreds of people dying in the heat dome in BC. Thousands of people fleeing their homes in Alberta right now. And that's just a few things that we've encountered. And we're seeing changing precipitation patterns. We're seeing droughts. We've lost 50% of the snowpack already in the southern part of New Brunswick, 25% in the northern part of New Brunswick already. This is terrifying, Madam Speaker. What does this mean for agriculture? What does this mean for people's livelihoods? I think of the fisheries. I think of the acidification of the ocean and what that's going to mean for the fisheries and the shellfish. Madam Speaker, we are on the highway to climate hell, to quote Antonio Guterres. And I was very surprised to hear the minister responsible for energy development say, let's not do this with hysteria and create an issue where there is none. I just can't understand how he could say that when there clearly is an issue. The experts, world leaders, climate scientists are all telling us we need to do things differently. And this idea of fracking being a good idea for a transition fuel, well, first of all, methane is much more potent short-term than carbon dioxide, so that is extremely harmful in terms of our climate. And then the other thing is, what kind of fossil fuel infrastructure could be developed and only used for a few years? The return on investment, whoever's doing it is going to seek an ROI on that. So we're locking in. Any new fossil fuel infrastructure is locked in for a long time, at least a decade, probably several decades. So that is what we're talking about. We are saying, no, we can't lock in more fossil fuel infrastructure, Madam Speaker. We cannot do it. And there's been talk about not seeing all sides of the story. I think that that's true about some people in this room. They're not seeing all sides to the climate crisis and understanding the severe impacts that it is already having, that it will have, and what we need to do. I also, I thought that I can't believe I need to explain that fracking's bad for the environment, but I'm going to. It's not just important because of the climate crisis, though that is a very important reason that we should not develop fracking in this province. But it risks our water. It can contribute to earthquakes, which we know we've seen in Western Canada and other places. There's the issue of dealing with wastewater. There's issues with the trucking and what happens to the infrastructure. I just talked about methane, and often there's methane leaks that don't even really get captured when we're quantifying the emissions from this. And of course there's air pollution at various stages of that. So there's just a brief rundown of non-climate reasons why we should not do fracking. And the people of this province and the First Nations of this province were very clear. And so this legislation goes along with not having a social license, with not having the consent of First Nations. This is something that's important to do. And we need to create a different vision for where we're going. We don't have time for this nonsense of fracking. As we saw in the news yesterday, the World Meteorological Organization is saying that we're likely to breach the 1.5 Celsius climate threshold by 2027. So, Madam Speaker, that's just a handful of years away. And, you know, as someone who has been working on these issues for quite a while now, I'm still kind of shocked by how fast things are going downhill. I'm still a little surprised and verklempt when I read things like this. I thought we had more time, Madam Speaker. I really thought we had more time. And I think of the people who are literally already dying. We're talking about people dying. And I think of the future. I think of the future we're leaving for our children. The scientists are telling us that if we don't show leadership by implementing legislation like this, that if we don't stop new fossil fuel infrastructure, that we are going to create a climate that we can't live in. These are facts. Why wouldn't we listen? I just don't understand why we wouldn't listen and why we wouldn't do everything we can to turn this ship around. Every degree matters. Every degree, every fraction of a degree matters in terms of whether there's a coral reef still alive, whether there are how many animals go extinct, how much food we have, how many people are able to still access water or not, whether people are able to work outdoors in the summer or not, whether we have enough snowpack in certain places to have water to drink, or whether there's too much water flooding our communities, whether there will be droughts. All of these things are already happening and ramping up. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how we would not do everything we can to slow it down as much as we can, as fast as we can. And that is what this legislation is about. And so I think it would be shameful to not support this legislation. I think it would be shameful to support fracking. I think it is shameful to want to invest in new fossil fuel infrastructure and to think that that is somehow going to contribute to the well-being of people. In certain measurements in capitalist system, sure, there's some GDP. Do you know what else creates GDP? Rebuilding communities. Do you know what costs a lot? Sure, battery storage, which exists, might be expensive. Big battery technology exists. Do you know what's even more expensive? Climate change impacts. The cost of insurance, the cost of rebuilding communities. My whole community could be underwater any year. That's what we're talking about, Madam Speaker. And so, I would love to see us move faster and invest more in energy efficiency, in renewable energy, in changing our consumption patterns, in moving away from fossil fuel as fast as humanly possible, which is a lot faster than humans have been making possible so far, Madam Speaker. But we have options. And you know, Madam Speaker, as my time winds down, I think of the youth who actually today at Tantramar Regional High School gathered to learn about climate crisis and to talk about what they can do this morning, today. And so I'm proud of them, and I sent a message, I couldn't be there, to encourage them to do everything they can and to hold government accountable. And so we need to be accountable to them, the youth, who are looking to us to do better. And we can do better. We are not doing our best on the climate. And so, Madam Speaker, I urge everyone in this legislature to really think about what this is about and what kind of future we could create for these youth and for ourselves, because we're already seeing the impacts, Madam Speaker. So thank you for the time to address Bill 56, and I urge all members of the House to please let this go past second reading to committee. Thank you.